Nobody starts a side hustle because life is going great. They start when waiting becomes the risk. In 2026, side hustles aren't about ambition, they're about relief. They're about buying time. They're about quiet survival. They're about stopping pressure before it turns into panic. And once I stopped listening to what people said they wanted to do and started watching what they actually did when money got tight, a pattern showed up, a clear one. People under pressure don't experiment. They don't chase trends. They don't reinvent themselves. They don't follow their passion. They copy what's already moving, quietly, locally, fast. Not because it's exciting, because it works. And once you see those patterns, side hustles stop looking random. They start looking predictable. So instead of asking, what's the best side hustle? The better question becomes, what do people reach for when money gets tight and waiting isn't an option? These are the 7 answers I kept seeing. Not theory, not hype, not future potential, just pressure-tested moves people are already making in 2026. The first side hustle people turn to when money gets tight isn't exciting. It's reselling. Not because it's scalable, not because it's glamorous, not because anyone dreams about it, but because it's immediate. Reselling is what people reach for when they're not trying to build a future, they're trying to stop the bleed. Rent is due, groceries went up, the margin is gone, and something has to move now. Reselling works under pressure because it doesn't require belief. It doesn't ask you to learn a new skill. It doesn't ask you to brand yourself. It doesn't ask you to wait. It asks one simple question. What do you already have that can turn into breathing room? That's why it's almost always the first move. Most people don't start by sourcing inventory. They start by scanning their life. Old phones, shoes in the closet, electronics they replaced but never sold, gear sitting idle, stuff that turns into cash before the next bill hits. Reselling isn't about freedom at first, it's about relief. And that's why it works when money is tight. Because when pressure is loud, people don't plan, they convert. They turn objects into liquidity. They turn clutter into time. They turn later into today. That first sale doesn't feel like success. It feels like oxygen. And once someone feels that, once the pressure drops just enough to think again, something changes. They stop chasing random hustles. They start paying attention, not to trends, but to movement. Here's what most people miss. The people who actually make money reselling aren't chasing big flips. They're moving volume. Small wins, repeatable demand, day after day. They learn what sells. They stop listing what doesn't, and they repeat what works, not because it's exciting, but because pressure forces consistency when motivation never could. That's also why reselling never really dies. Every time it comes up, someone asks, "Isn't that dead?" No. What's dead is thinking platforms die just because they stop being trendy. When money gets tight, people don't stop buying. They stop buying new. And that's why resale markets quietly stay alive during every downturn. Not because of growth charts, not because of algorithms, because pressure pushes buyers and sellers into the same place. One side needs cash, the other needs cheaper options. Platforms that connect those two don't disappear, they get busier. Eventually, you run out of things to sell. And once the pressure eases, people start looking for something that doesn't depend on clearing out their past. That's when the second side hustle shows up. Eventually, reselling hits a wall. Not because it stops working, but because it runs out of fuel. The closet empties, the drawers clear, the extra tech is gone. And the pressure doesn't disappear, it just changes shape. That's the moment people realize something uncomfortable. Selling what you had bought time, but now you need something that creates it. Not someday. Not after a course. Not once you figure things out. Now. That's when the second side hustle shows up. Not as a dream, as a response. The second side hustle people start when money gets tight isn't about building anything. It's about control. Control over time. Control over cash flow. Control over when money hits the account. That's why when pressure doesn't go away after reselling, people turn to delivery apps, driving gigs, and on-demand work. Not because it's fulfilling, not because it's impressive, but because it answers the most urgent question pressure creates. How fast can money show up if I move right now? When money is tight, people don't want promises, they want immediacy. And gig work is one of the few places where effort and money still sit close together in time. You drive, you deliver, you complete, you get paid. Sometimes the same day, sometimes the same week, but close enough to feel real. That proximity matters more than people admit. Under pressure, long timelines feel dangerous. Delayed rewards feel unreliable. Anything that asks you to wait feels like a gamble. Gig work doesn't ask you to believe, it asks you to show up. That's why it becomes the second move. After reselling creates breathing room, people look for something that doesn't depend on inventory, sourcing, or luck. They want predictable motion. And gig work offers exactly that. Not freedom, motion. Here's what most people misunderstand about this stage. People don't choose gig work because it's easy. They choose it because it removes uncertainty. You don't have to guess what sells. You don't have to research demand. You don't have to build trust with strangers online. The demand is already there. The system already exists. The rules are simple. Log in, accept, complete, repeat. When money gets tight, simplicity becomes safety. That's why people who swore they'd never do delivery end up doing delivery. Not because they changed their values, because pressure changed the math. What matters most under pressure isn't dignity or status, it's cash velocity. How fast money moves, how often it hits, how predictable it feels. Gig work wins on that metric. But here's the part nobody likes to say. People don't love gig work, they use it. They use it to stabilize, they use it to catch up, they use it to stop the slide. And the ones who survive this stage understand one critical truth. Gig work isn't a plan, it's a bridge. The people who burn out are the ones who mistake it for a destination. They log more hours, they chase bonuses, they grind harder. But the people who move forward do something different. They treat gig work like a pressure valve, not a lifestyle. They pick specific windows, they work specific zones, they stop when the objective is met. They're not chasing income, they're buying optionality, a buffer, a pause, a chance to think clearly again. Because once pressure quiets, different decisions become possible. That's the real value of this hustle. Not the money itself, but what the money allows you to stop doing. Stop panicking, stop reacting, stop reaching for the next desperate move. And just like reselling, this hustle has limits. Time caps it, energy caps it. Eventually, life pushes back, which is exactly why it never lasts forever. But it doesn't have to. Its job isn't to make you rich, its job is to stabilize the moment. And once stability returns, people start asking a different question. How can I do something that doesn't trade every dollar for my time? That question leads to the third side hustle. And that's where the rebuild starts to shift from survival to structure. Gig work buys time. That's what it's good at. You log in, you move, money shows up. But after a while, something starts to feel off. Not because it stops paying, but because every dollar still depends on your body showing up again tomorrow. You miss a day, the money misses you. And once the pressure quiets just enough to think, people notice a pattern. Reselling turned the past into cash. Gig work turned time into money. But neither creates anything that stays when you stop. That's when people start looking for something different. Not passive income, not a business, not entrepreneurship. Something simpler. Something local. Something where demand already exists and doesn't disappear when an app changes its rules. That's when side hustle number 3 shows up. The third side hustle people start when money gets tight isn't glamorous. It doesn't sound impressive, it doesn't make a good Instagram post, and nobody brags about it, which is exactly why it works. When pressure sticks around longer than expected, people stop chasing platforms and start looking for problems near them that won't go away. That's where local service work comes in. Cleaning, junk hauling, yard work, moving help, handyman tasks, basic repairs, pet sitting, pressure washing, furniture assembly. Not skilled trades, not certifications, just things people don't want to do themselves. Here's the shift that happens at this stage. People stop asking, "What can I do online?" and start asking, "What do people around me already pay for?" That's a different lens. Local services don't rely on algorithms. They don't depend on trends. They don't require content, branding, or audience building. They rely on need. And when money gets tight, need doesn't disappear. It becomes more selective. People stop outsourcing everything, but they still outsource the things that cost them time, require effort, or pile up fast. That's why this hustle shows up third, not first. Not when panic is high, but when survival has stabilized enough to look for repeatability. Here's what surprises most people. Local services often pay better per hour than gig work without the same wear and tear. Because you're not selling minutes, you're selling outcomes. A clean house, a cleared garage, a mowed lawn, a fixed door, a moved couch. People don't argue about outcomes the way they argue about time. They don't ask, "Why did this take so long?" They ask, "When can you come back?" That's the shift. Under pressure, people don't want more hours. They want fewer decisions. Local services reduce decision fatigue. You set a price, you do the job, you leave. No chasing surge pay, no refreshing apps, no guessing if tomorrow will be slow. And here's the part nobody says out loud. Local service work restores dignity under pressure. Not status, dignity. You show up, you solve something real, you get paid directly. No ratings, no faceless system, no invisible algorithm deciding your worth. Just a person who needed something done and someone who did it. That direct exchange matters when people have felt powerless for too long. But this hustle has limits too. Your body still caps it. Your schedule still matters. You can still burn out if you say yes to everything. The people who get stuck here treat it like endless labor. The people who move forward treat it like positioning. They notice which jobs repeat, which clients refer, which tasks pay more with less effort. They don't scale yet. They observe. Because this stage isn't about growth. It's about learning where money already flows locally, without marketing, without hype, without online noise. And once people see that clearly, something clicks. If people will pay for outcomes, and outcomes don't require your presence every time, then the next move isn't more work, it's leverage. That realization leads to the fourth side hustle, the first one that stops depending entirely on your time. And that's where the rebuild stops being reactive and starts becoming intentional. Before I go any further, pause with me for a second. If you're still here, it's probably not because you're looking for side hustles. It's because something in this is familiar. The pressure, the sequence, the way one move leads to another, not by choice, but by necessity. If that's you, stay with this. Not because I'm about to give you the answer, but because what comes next is where the pattern changes. Most people never make it past the next step, not because it's impossible, but because nobody explains why it shows up when it does. All right, let's keep going. By the time people reach local service work, something important has shifted. They're no longer panicking, they're no longer scrambling, they're no longer reacting hour by hour. They've stabilized, and stability changes the question. It's no longer, how do I get money fast? It becomes, how do I stop starting over every week? This is where most people make the wrong move. They try to scale, they try to brand, they try to turn hustle into identity. But the people who move forward don't add more effort, they remove friction. That's where side hustle number 4 shows up. The fourth side hustle people start when money gets tight isn't about being online, it's about being repeatable. By this stage, people have learned something quietly powerful. Selling time directly works. Selling outcomes works better. But selling outcomes without being physically present, that's when leverage begins. Not passive income, not freedom, leverage. And leverage doesn't start with scale, it starts with detachment. This is where simple digital services enter. Not influencer work, not content creation, not courses or coaching. Things like basic website updates, simple landing pages, email setup, CRM cleanup, calendar automation, spreadsheet tracking, basic social posting, document formatting, virtual assistants. Unsexy, invisible, boring, which is exactly why people pay for them. Here's the key shift at this stage. People stop selling their presence and start selling their reliability. Clients don't care who you are, they care that the thing works and keeps working after you leave. That's a massive psychological upgrade, because now you don't need to show up at a location, you don't need tools or equipment, you don't need inventory or stock, you don't need an audience. You need competence and consistency. And under pressure, people don't want creativity, they want relief from small, annoying problems that never go away. That's why this works. Businesses don't stop needing help when money tightens, they stop wanting risk. So they hire quietly, locally, repeatably. People who succeed at this stage don't call themselves freelancers. They don't pitch, they don't brand, they fill gaps. Someone needs reports organized. Someone needs emails cleaned. Someone needs their site updated but doesn't want an agency. Someone needs systems they already pay for to actually work. These aren't opportunities, they're maintenance problems, and maintenance always survives downturns. Here's the part nobody tells you. This stage feels boring, and that's the signal you're doing it right. There's no adrenaline, no rush, no daily scramble, just work that shows up again next week. And the people who get stuck here are the ones who try to turn it into something exciting. The people who move forward do the opposite. They simplify, they standardize, they repeat the same task for multiple clients. That repetition does two things. 1, it lowers effort. 2, it reveals leverage. You start noticing, I do this exact thing over and over, and that observation is everything. Because once a task repeats, it no longer needs you every time. It needs a system, a template, a process, a tool. That's when people stop being workers and start becoming operators. But not yet, because step 4 isn't about systems, it's about distance. Distance from time, distance from place, distance from urgency. And once people experience that distance, they never want to go back. Which leads to side hustle number 5, the first one that creates income without daily action. That's where the rebuild becomes irreversible. This step works because it's quiet, it's stable, it's boring on purpose. That's why most people skip it. And that's why the ones who don't stop feeling trapped. By the time people reach this point, something subtle but permanent has happened. They're no longer panicking, they're no longer reacting, they're no longer trading urgency for relief. They've experienced distance. Distance from daily pressure, distance from immediate consequences, distance from the feeling that one bad day can undo everything. And distance does something dangerous in a good way. It gives people time to notice patterns, not just in their work, but in how money itself behaves. They start seeing that the biggest problem wasn't effort, it wasn't discipline, it wasn't motivation. It was that everything they'd done so far required them to be present every single time money was created. And once you see that clearly, you can't unsee it. That's when people stop asking, "What can I do next?" and start asking, "What can keep working when I don't?" And here's the moment people don't expect. Once work becomes repeatable, it starts leaving residue. The same checklist, the same email, the same setup, the same explanation over and over. That repetition isn't efficiency, it's a signal. Because when the same thing keeps showing up, it doesn't need to be recreated, it needs to be captured. The fifth side hustle shows up when repetition gets too loud to ignore. By this stage, people have done the work. They've repeated tasks. They've solved the same problems again and again. They've noticed what breaks, what slows things down, and what people keep asking for. And at some point, a realization hits. I keep doing the same thing for different people in slightly different ways. That's not coincidence, that's signal. This is where digital products quietly emerge, not as a dream, but as a byproduct. Not courses, not ebooks, not knowledge businesses. Things like templates, checklists, trackers, scripts, onboarding docs, SOPs, calculators, frameworks, internal tools, assets that already exist because the work demanded them. Here's the critical distinction. People who fail at digital products start with ideas. People who succeed start with friction. They don't ask, "What should I sell?" They ask, "What keeps slowing this down?" Every time a process repeats, friction appears. Every time friction appears, an asset can be created. That's the entire logic. And because these assets come from real work, they don't need convincing. They already solve a problem. That's why this step feels quieter than people expect. There's no launch, no audience, no hype cycle. Someone finishes a job and realizes, if I had this earlier, this would have been easier. So they formalize it. And the first time it gets reused without them, something shifts internally. Not excitement, not pride, relief. Because money showed up without presence. Not a lot, not life-changing, but enough to matter. Enough to change how tomorrow feels. That's why this step is so important. It's the first time income becomes decoupled from action. Not fully, not forever, but partially. And partial detachment is powerful. It teaches the nervous system something new. I don't have to be on every second to move forward. That reduces pressure more than income ever could. Here's where most people get this wrong. They try to make the product perfect. They try to brand it. They try to scale it too early. The people who move forward don't. They treat it like a tool, not a business. They let it exist quietly. They let it serve a small group. They let it compound slowly. Because this stage isn't about volume, it's about proof. Proof that value can exist independently. Proof that effort can echo. Proof that money can arrive without demand. Once that proof exists, behavior changes again. People stop chasing. They stop reacting. They stop stacking hustle on top of hustle. They start designing. And that's the difference between someone rebuilding and someone constructing something durable. This step doesn't make you rich, it makes you unstuck. It introduces the idea that your past work doesn't have to disappear once the task is done. And once that idea lands, the next question becomes unavoidable. If one asset can do this, what happens when multiple assets exist together? That's where step 6 begins, and where wealth starts behaving differently than income. Once someone experiences money showing up without their direct presence, even in a small way, something irreversible happens. Not financially, mentally. They stop measuring progress by effort. They stop equating work with worth. They stop believing every dollar has to be chased down personally, because now they've seen proof. Not a theory, not a promise. Proof. A template sold twice, a checklist reused, a system someone paid for without a conversation. It's not life-changing money, but it changes how the future feels. And once that door opens, the question evolves again. Not, how do I make more money, but how do I stop rebuilding the same thing over and over? That question leads to step 6. The 6th side hustle people move into when money has been tight for a long time isn't flashy. It doesn't look like a business from the outside. It doesn't announce itself, and most people don't even call it a side hustle. It's a system. By this stage, people aren't looking for speed. They're looking for stability that doesn't require vigilance. They've already learned selling possessions creates relief. Selling time creates motion. Selling outcomes creates repeatability. Selling assets creates detachment. Now they want something else entirely. They want continuity. This is where small, systemized operations quietly emerge. Not startups, not brands, not companies. Things like a local service paired with a scheduler and fixed pricing. A recurring maintenance offering tied to a simple checklist. A niche digital service with standardized deliverables. A product plus service bundle that runs the same every time. Nothing new is being invented here. What's happening instead is compression. Multiple steps collapse into one predictable flow. Inquiry, delivery, payment, repeat. The people who succeed here aren't smarter, they're calmer. They stop customizing, they stop improvising, they stop chasing exceptions. They build something that behaves the same way every time, because predictability is what removes pressure permanently. Here's the quiet shift that defines step 6. Money stops being something you earn and starts being something that arrives. Not magically, not passively, but procedurally. The system does what it's designed to do even when attention drifts elsewhere. And that's new. This stage feels different because it doesn't demand intensity. There's no rush, no scramble, no adrenaline, just maintenance. Check-ins, small adjustments, occasional corrections. And because the system is simple, it doesn't break easily. That's why people who reach this stage often feel something unexpected. They feel bored. Boredom here is a signal, not a problem. It means the system is doing its job. Most people quit at this stage, not because it doesn't work, but because it doesn't feel like progress anymore. No excitement, no novelty, no visible struggle. Just quiet consistency. But the ones who stay understand something critical. This is where compounding actually begins. not through exponential growth, but through time without disruption. Each month the system runs, it becomes more trusted. Each cycle it completes, it becomes more reliable. And reliability is what creates leverage later. Because once something is reliable, it can be duplicated, delegated, expanded. But that's not the goal yet. The goal here isn't scale, it's non-fragility. To build something that doesn't collapse when attention shifts, energy dips, or life gets complicated. That's why this step matters so much. It's the first time money stops requiring emotional involvement. You're no longer negotiating with urgency. You're no longer reacting to surprises. You're no longer rebuilding from scratch. You're maintaining. And maintenance doesn't feel impressive, but it's how pressure permanently loses its grip. Once people experience this, they stop chasing the next move. They start asking a final question. If one system can do this, what happens when multiple systems work together? That question leads to the final step, the one most people never reach, not because it's hard, but because they never stay long enough to see it. If you're still here, pause for a second. That matters. Not because you watched a long video, but because most people never stay long enough to see this part. They stop at relief. They stop at stability. They stop when things feel okay enough. But you didn't. And that's the quiet difference between surviving pressure and outgrowing it. This is the point where the scramble ends, not because life gets easy, but because the rebuild finally holds. All right, let's finish this. By the time someone reaches this stage, money no longer feels urgent. Not because there's an overflow, not because everything is solved, but because nothing is fragile anymore. Miss a day, the system still runs. Lose momentum, the structure still stands. Life happens, and it doesn't collapse everything underneath it. That's when people realize something they never expected. They're no longer rebuilding. They're standing on something. And that changes how every future decision is made. That's where step 7 lives. The seventh side hustle people arrive at after money has been tight for a long time doesn't feel like a hustle at all. It feels quiet, almost boring, and deeply unfamiliar, because for the first time, income isn't coming from motion. It's coming from ownership. Not ownership in the Instagram sense, not boss life, not flashy assets. Ownership of process, systems, and positioning. By now, people have converted assets into liquidity, traded time for speed, sold outcomes, detached effort from income, built systems that run without constant attention. Step 7 isn't about adding something new, it's about stacking what already works. This is where multiple small systems exist at once. No single source of income carries all the pressure. Failure in one area doesn't threaten stability. Nothing here is massive. That's the point. A local service, a recurring digital product, a maintenance-based micro-business, a simple asset that pays quietly. Each one alone is unimpressive. Together, they're resilient. This is the stage where people stop asking, how do I make more money? And start asking, how do I reduce exposure? Because wealth at this level isn't about growth, it's about shock absorption. When costs rise, nothing breaks. When demand shifts, nothing panics. When life throws a curve, nothing disappears. Pressure no longer dictates behavior, and that's the real definition of freedom. Not excess, but choice under stress. Here's the part most people never hear. Wealth doesn't feel like excitement. It feels like quiet confidence. You don't wake up thinking about money. You don't check balances compulsively. You don't need constant wins to feel okay. Money becomes background infrastructure, like electricity. You only notice it when it's gone. And at this stage, it rarely is. Because nothing here depends on motivation, perfect timing, hustle cycles, or being on all the time. It depends on design. And design outlasts effort. That's why people who reach this point stop consuming money content. They're not looking for answers anymore. They're maintaining alignment. They're adjusting systems. They're reinforcing what works. They're saying no more often than yes. Not because they're done, but because they're finally in control. This is the moment the rebuild ends. Not with fireworks, not with a breakthrough, not with a number, but with stability that doesn't need defending. And that's what most people never notice. The goal was never to get rich fast. It was to stop being vulnerable forever. Pressure created the journey. Structure ended it. And once structure exists, money stops being something you chase and starts being something that supports you, quietly, reliably, on your terms. This isn't the end of the story. It's the moment the cycle breaks, when effort stops resetting your life and progress finally starts to hold. You're no longer reacting to pressure. You're standing on structure. And once that happens, you don't need to rush anymore. You can choose your next move, clearly. If this felt familiar, don't rush past it. Sit with it. Re-watch the parts that hit. And when you're ready to keep building from structure, not pressure, stay connected here. This is where we build without panic. This is Mind Over Money Raw, where survival ends and the rebuild finally sticks.